Thank you all for joining us for Move It, Transportation and Agriculture webinar. We are excited to have you. Please feel free to put your name in the chat and where you're from. That would be great. My name's Jane Hunt. I'm Director of Education at Education Projects, and on behalf of Grow Next Gen and the Ohio Soybean Council, I'm going to introduce Tom Fontana to start us off.
Thanks a lot, Jane. As Jane said, I'm Tom Fontana, Director of Research and Education with the Ohio Soybean Council, and we're really happy that you could join us today. Good, Alex is here. Anyhow, Grow Next Gen is a premier program, education program developed by the Ohio Soybean Council with our good friends, educationprojects.org. We appreciate all the hard work they've done over the years to put programs like this together. Today's subject is a very important one. I don't think there's anything much more important than people who buy soybeans and transport them around the world. So 50% of our soybeans in Ohio are exported. So the people like Mike Hogan, Corporate Origination Manager, and Alex Abrams, rail trader with Consolidated Grain and Barge, are very important to our industry. So on behalf of Ohio's 25,000 soybean farmers who pay into the soybean checkoff, thanks, Mike. Thanks, Alex, for being with us today. And everybody enjoy the webinar.
Thanks, Tom. I would like to also recognize another member of your staff from the Ohio Soybean Council and a member from our staff before we get started. So Maddie Lehman, if you can wave. Good to see you. Thanks for joining. And Heather Bryan works with me at Education Projects. And so I'm going to turn it over to Mike and let him start us off.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Jane. Really appreciate it. Really appreciate the invite to be here today as well. So my apologies to everyone for the technical difficulties. That is completely on us. So I apologize for that and apologize for some of the little pop-ups that we say. I can't shift that around on my screen, but those should stop shortly with that. So a couple of the things that we really want to sit down and talk about when we look at, how transportation relates to agriculture and just the importance of it throughout not just agriculture, but just American and worldwide industry and trade, if you will. So we thought one of the best ways to do this is to start off with a little bit of a video. And I'll give some fair warning to everybody. This is a little bit of an infomercial for Consolidated Grain and Barge, which is the company that myself and Alex works for. And to let you know a little bit about ourselves, I'm the Corporate Origination Manager, and that's just a fancy term for I help, our buyers buy all the grain from the producers, if you will. So all about procuring the corn, soybeans, wheat, those types of crops from the producers directly themselves into our elevator system. Now, once my team kind of gets a hold of it, then we generally turn it over to Alex, who's also along with me, and he's going to describe a little bit about the rail system. We turn it over once it's within, our elevators, and we're generally shipping it out by one of three transportation modes: truck, barge, or rail. And so those are three key transportation factors for us and also for the country and the global economy, if you will, on that. So those are kind of what we're concentrating on. So a couple of the things as you watch this video, again, don't mind some of the CGB centric type stuff. That's not really the purpose of it. It's just the easiest way we can, in this virtual kind of session, show what it looks like for those different transportation types to interact with, a grain elevator, and then you see them, kind of in their natural habitat. What does it look like for a rail car to be loaded? What does it look like for a barge to be loaded, or grain to go from a barge to the export elevator and then back onto an ocean-going vessel? Those are all kind of just neat things to see and look at. So again, the video is what's going to do that. It's going to be about 3 minutes long. So I'll kind of mention that to you guys. It'll be a little bit. And then when that's done, we'll come back and we'll describe kind of what you saw a little bit and kind of how transportation and the ag system kind of collide and work together with that. So with that, I will start the video.
Oops.
For 50 years, Consolidated Grain and Barge Company has been on the move, connecting America's heartland with global markets. Embracing innovation and an entrepreneurial spirit, CGB constantly pushes new boundaries and opens new markets to better serve and support customers. Headquartered in Covington, Louisiana, CGB operates over 100 grain facilities across the Midwest. Using an intermodal transportation network, including rail, truck, barge, and container, CGB is well suited to carefully carry the harvests of farms in the Midwest and beyond, providing access to customers and consumers at home and abroad. A half-century ago in St. Louis, Missouri, company founder Bob Frayne knew he had a game-changing idea, a better way to trade barge freight by merchandising tariff rates. That innovative idea would soon revolutionize the barge freight industry. He put his plan to work by forming a small company called Consolidated Grain and Barge. And what started with 3 employees in a small office downtown grew, inside and out. Lots of young people with fresh ideas and a number of new businesses, purchases, and acquisitions led to many successes and many lessons that all helped develop a strong and diverse company with strategic locations throughout America's heartland. In the late 1980s, as the international demand for both food and livestock feed continued to rise, CGB caught the attention of 2 global companies, one of which was Zeno, a farm member-owned cooperative of over 5 million Japanese farmers. The subsequent purchase of Consolidated Grain and Barge combined the strong base and expertise of CGB with Zeno Grain Corporation's large, efficient export elevator in Convent, Louisiana. Together, they continue to ensure a steady food and feed pipeline to the world. Today, with more than 100 elevators, 38 of them strategically located along the Mississippi, Ohio, Arkansas, and Illinois rivers, Consolidated Grain and Barge is able to access a wide variety of commodities from all of the prime U.S. growing areas.
All right. So thank you guys for kind of going through that, if you will. I think there's a couple interesting points on that. One, you got to see the transportation and the grain elevator system kind of interacting there, how some of those things are loaded and unloaded. Hopefully that gave you a good picture as to what's really happening when you're moving grain around. The second part, and we'll get to that here in a little bit, was the thought process that, you know, CGB was founded on a unique idea actually centered around transportation, which I'll dive into in a little bit. And that's one of the things, you know, most of the major grain companies, and we're probably, by various measurements, we're either the 4th or 5th largest grain company in the country, depending on, again, what type of measurement you want to look at. But each of the majors, I would say, kind of had their own unique contribution to shape kind of how the grain industry is formulated. And I'll kind of describe our part in that and why it relates to transportation so well. But I think one of the key things that I always like to relay is that, you know, we kind of have a saying around here that, you know, most grain companies are really kind of transportation companies, almost in disguise, if you will, by that, meaning so much of how we move grain from the producer to our elevators and then eventually on to some form of an end user is really dictated by transportation, and not just the mode, truck, rail, barge, but really the cost and the market of that transportation goes into it so much. You know, at a very basic level, if any of you are, you know, have your own farm or whatnot, a lot of times what you end up doing is you sit there and you look around and say, all right, my truck can probably hit 30, 50, maybe 100 miles within reasonable cost, and you kind of look for your best bid. And wherever that happens to be, as long as you know there's not a long wait line and all those other fun things that go along with it, that's generally where your grain is going to go that day. We're no different as the elevator system. We just have kind of bigger containers that go a little bit further to be able to put them in and get it to where it wants to be. So what can be complicated is hopefully a little bit easier if those of you that are involved in agriculture can kind of relate it back to what you guys do on the farm from that standpoint. Before we continue to dive into it, though, there's a couple things that I really want to point out. I think the first thing is just how the markets move in general. And again, don't want to necessarily lose anybody here, but I think it is important to explain that. Most people, I think, within agriculture are familiar with the Chicago Board of Trade and the CME futures products, corn, beans, wheat, all those sort of fun things. And really the purpose of those types of contracts is to ensure that there's just the right amount of grain available in the worldwide kind of supply demand. Meaning, when prices get down and depressed, usually that means there's too much grain, and they're trying to lower that by, again, lowering the price. That's kind of the lever that's pulled for those types of items. Conversely, if they need to get production boosted, a lot of times they'll also accelerate that price higher. And again, that gives the incentive to the producer to do that. So it kind of controls worldwide supply and demand. The basis level, which is something that's either added or subtracted from the futures price to give an overall kind of final cash price to a producer or a grain elevator, so to speak, that is something that's really the lever of getting the grain from where it is to where it needs to be. Meaning a lot of times, if we think, places like Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, kind of are all our neighbors, most of those are surplus states, meaning if you look at just the grain needed both locally and kind of throughout those states, we grow enough to serve our own needs. And then we also grow enough that we can send some to other areas. So a lot of times, and Alex can get into this a little bit, grain coming from Ohio, it's generally going to drift down to the river market and go for export, or it might move into the southeastern part of the U.S. For a lot of the animal feeders, mainly hogs that are around in the Carolinas and the Virginia areas, et cetera, on that. So, there's different kind of flow patterns that happen with some of that excess grain. And the basis level is really what dictates where that needs to be. And to kind of show you guys that here a little bit, I've provided some color-coded maps, and we'll show corn basis and soybean basis. And one of the things that happened this year is that in agriculture, we had a pretty solid growing season everywhere east of the Mississippi. And that was a really good year for most people. It was average crops to above average crops. If you went west of the Mississippi, specifically out into the Western Plains states, all of a sudden there was a drought, there was some rough growing seasons, and they just didn't grow the crop that they did. Now the East made up for it. So on a national scale, pardon me, whereas the futures were concerned, there was enough there. They didn't necessarily accelerate prices from kind of already what the war and some other things have done to accelerate prices kind of there. But what you notice is when you look at the basis maps, and I'll kind of try to show you guys this, you see these bases where all of a sudden these are positive basis, meaning they're going to add dollars and cents to the futures price versus a negative basis on that. So if I look at, somewhere here in Ohio where it's negative 32, and I go over here into, kind of Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, where it's $1.30 over, that's basically $1.60 in difference that you can make moving grain from Ohio, for example, all the way over into some of those Western states. Now that's kind of that basis and why there's that difference. That's trying to say, hey, load this onto a barge, a rail car, a truck, something to get it from where there's plenty to where there's not. And so, those markets signal that through some of these areas. So when you think about futures and basis markets, it's really the basis market that controls the transportation, because again, most grain companies are going to hedge off their futures risk, in the markets, et cetera. So they don't worry about that. It's just where can they go? And again, Ohio with basically a -30 basis, up somewhere out west, that's $1, $1.30. There's going to be enough there to go ahead and probably buy a rail shuttle, get a barge, do something to get that grain from point A to point B. So just wanted to take a moment to do that. Also soybeans, pardon me, I've got a little cold here, so you guys will have to battle through me with the coughs here a little bit, but very similar thing. We've got basis that is generally negative over here in the East, and you've got positive basis or less negative basis over here to the west, which again shows that movement as we're trying to go through it. So just want to take a moment to explain that. Now, as we think about exports in general, which is where most of our excess grain goes to other than just internally shifting it from point A to point B, I want to point out where's this stuff actually going, if you will, on that. So when we think in terms of corn, it's basically Pacific Rim countries and then a lot of the Americas. So a lot of Latin America, Central America, South America, as you look at that. So Mexico, far and away, is our biggest customer. Alex on the rail desk, that's where he's going to send a lot of the corn. He's going to move that, basically from the U.S. and then that export will go down into Mexico more often than not. You see a little bit there in Japan is number 2. Then we go again in the U.S. for quite a bit. Colombia, Canada, Peru, Guatemala, Costa Rica, Honduras. We get, Korea, the Koreas. You get Taiwan over there. China is kind of in and out of the market. I excluded them from this because they either go way past Mexico or they're barely there, depending on kind of their mood and what they have in store. So I just wanted to show you the main ones, but a lot of it's very close to home. So I think a lot of people find that interesting at the end of the day. When you think of soybeans, that one is clearly dominated by China. That is, again, just kind of the big deal. That's the gorilla that's out there. And that's why our relationship with China is so very important. They are one of the largest commodity buyers in the world. And hey, we're a commodity grower here in the U.S. and in North America in general. So we can supply them with things, not only soybean and ag products, but things like metals and softs and even energies. That's a big deal for us at the end of the day. So again, when you look at this, you've got China, then you're over in Europe. Then again, we kind of stay in Mexico, move a little bit towards the North African area in Egypt. And again, just most of that, the rest of this is over in the Pacific Rim countries, as you think about it. One of the things that I do like to mention on this is one of the things that gets brought up academically a lot is the water trade. Hey, there's plenty of spots in the world with some of the global changes that are happening that they're just too dry. One of the things that I find incredibly interesting about this business is I truly believe we're already in the water trade, meaning we can export water in the form of the actual crops. So we have excess of it through our river system, Great Lakes here in the US. We grow an abundance of crops most of the time, and we are able to share that with the rest of the world. And especially when you think of the North Africa and the Middle East areas, places like Japan that don't have a lot of arable land, instead of sending tankers of water all around the world for this, we're able to do it in food that was already grown with water, kind of where it's at. So I think that's an important distinction to kind of point out. So this is just kind of laying the groundwork in my mind for where this stuff goes, what the trade's all about. Now I'd like to take a little bit more of a dive here into the actual transportation and kind of the sizing. I think that's always interesting when I think about it. So I always like to start off with kind of, what does it mean to be a truck, a rail car, and a barge? So at its simplest level, a truck is basically 1,000 bushels of grain. It's a little less than that. You're 930 bushels, 970 is going to be your typical amount of grain that you can utilize. And then the next kind of size up, if you will, is a rail car. A rail car holds about 3,500 bushels. So that's going to hold 3 to 4 semi-trucks within each rail car that you have. The next level that we go up is a barge. And if you look on here, you'll see that it shows, 100,000, 120,000 bushels. And yes, you can load some barges to that at absolutely maximum depths when the river isn't dry like it was this year. But most of the time, you're going to fit about 60,000 to 80,000 bushels on a barge. So one of the things that stands out to me is just kind of the difference in size. So a rail car from a semi-truck isn't really that much different. You're talking 3 to 4 times that capacity. Then when you go to a barge, that's 60 to 80 trucks, or even a little bit more that can fit on there, or 30, 35 rail cars that can go with it. And I think that's what's impressive. Now, most rail cars, and Alex can dive into the nitty gritty of this when we get to his part, but figure a rail shuttle, where they connect all the train cars together and whatnot, that's going to be about 100 cars or so. So 350,000 bushels of corn is going to be what's going to generally be on one of those big long string rail cars that you see going about. When you think of barges, depending on the river and where you're going, if you can get below St. Louis and below the Ohio River, where, you can stack, 20 to 40 barges when the river water is good. You're talking about some serious bushels that can move in a hurry, right? And so water is by far the most efficient transportation method that we have. And it's one of those things that when you think of CGB specifically, we are very river centric. I'm not sure that's a word, but I use it a lot, meaning the majority of our facilities are right along the rivers, if you will. And it's because we are a big barge company. In fact, CGB stands for Consolidated Grain and Barge, if you will, on that. So, it's just important to think about what this is, and as you kind of grasp this visual, but that was kind of the talking through that I wanted to share with you guys. And also think of the energy efficiency. So what this graph here is showing is really, you take 1 ton of grain and you try to move it basically using 1 gallon of fuel. And you do that by truck, by rail car, by barge. And none of these are overly inefficient, right? You can get 60 miles on a truck with a load of grain. That's actually pretty good. Over 200 miles, when you think of it from a rail standpoint, and barge, you're probably 500 to 600 miles off of that single gallon. And again, a lot of that just has to do with size capabilities. And again, you're using the water and, the tow power and all of that stuff. So again, when we think of being clean and green, a lot of times, while these are very old ways to move things that may seem inefficient, they're actually a pretty doggone good way to get things from point A to point B around the world with that. And I think it's important for us to think about that quite a bit. And what somebody brought up a long time ago to me that said, you can really ship, fruits and vegetables from Peru up to here, in the wintertime, and that's how we always have fresh fruit. And they're like, man, that can be really inefficient by ocean going vessels. And somebody did the math once and said, actually, that's the most efficient. What's the least efficient is everybody going from their homes to the grocery store within 2 or 3 miles, driving their own cars to do some of these things. And I never really thought of it until somebody mentioned that to me and kind of showed the math. And it's like, wow. So again, we think of these sometimes as maybe not the cleanest or newest ways to do things, but they're incredibly efficient at the end of the day. Then kind of as we move forward, as promised, kind of CGB story, if you will. You saw this kind of highlight within the video before, and it talked about Bob Frayne, who was our founder, started CGB back in the late 60s, early 70s. And what Bob's idea was, and he was at Pillsbury for a number of years, excuse me. And the way barge freight was set up, still today, but especially back in the day, was the Army Corps of Engineers assigned each river segment, each point along the river, a cost per ton to move whatever it was by barge to another point, basically down to the Gulf. So for example, for most of the audience here, Cincinnati, Ohio would be the closest river point. And it costs $4.69 a ton per the Army Corps of Engineers to move something from Cincinnati down to the Gulf of Mexico, is what that cost was. Well, until the early 70s, when Bob had kind of proposed this to the industry and lobbied for change, think about how inefficient that would make the transportation industry. That's great in the middle of July when there's no real grain movement, right? There's nothing there. The barge operator will move the barge up, move it down, and probably gladly take it down for $4.69. Now think about harvest pressure. All the semi trucks are coming in from the farm fields, et cetera. And it's crazy. And we need barges and barges and barges to stay open because our bins get filled in about 2-3 days of harvest. And we've still got 40 more days to go. So the barge or the rail car or the truck then becomes our elevator from that point forward. And without timely transportation, we could be sunk in the water and send bushels to competition and all sorts of fun stuff that we don't like to do, right? And so from that standpoint, what Bob proposed was to say, you know what, why don't we trade this like we do everything else in the ag markets or equities markets, et cetera. So what he proposed is that, and as you can see there, we trade it by a tariff rate. Meaning that if it's kind of quiet, it's May, June, July, not much going on, yeah, this stuff can probably trade at $4.69 a ton. And, the barge company would be happy to move it. If we want those guys stepping into high gear, we probably need to incentivize them to do something different. So, right now, January, which is a huge time frame for farmers to deliver, it's a fresh tax year, they're emptying out their bins, et cetera. We're seeing 300, 400, 500 trucks a day at a lot of our facilities, and we're already plumb full with bushels. That's a lot to go through. So barge freight is trading at 500% of that tariff, which basically means I take that $4.69, multiply it by 5, and that's now what we have to pay the barge company to go ahead and move that grain down, which is $23.50 basically a ton now. So all of a sudden they have a lot more incentive to go ahead and do that because they're making a lot more money, a lot more profits doing that. So again, times of quietness, it's going to be a lower price. times where it's going wild, it's going to be a higher price. So our contribution is that we legitimized in our business, we call it merchandising, but we made a market out of transportation. Same thing's true in rail, same thing's true in barge from that standpoint. The transportation cost goes up and down with supply and demand, if you will, on that. So that's kind of the neat thing. And we pride ourselves on kind of being the inventors of that through our founder, pardon me, and being able to kind of be at the forefront of continuing that operation as we go here. So just wanted to show everybody just a map of the U.S. river system, if you will. So there are 5 basic main segments, if you will. You've got the lower Mississippi, you've got the upper Mississippi, the Ohio, the Illinois, and then you have this Arkansas River that basically runs through Little Rock and eventually terminates in Tulsa from a navigation standpoint. Now, it technically goes all the way back into Colorado. It's just not navigable going back that far from that standpoint. So these are kind of the main waterway systems. And like I said, this is broken into several segments and it gets too busy. But each of these segments have different price points. Like I said, Cincinnati's $4.69 to move to the Gulf. You're looking up here in Minneapolis, you're going to be paying over $6 a ton to do that. It's just a couple bucks to do it down here in the lower Mississippi segments on some of those things. So again, there's different costs to doing this. And as you can tell, the closer you are to the Gulf, the cheaper it is. The further you are away from the Gulf, the more expensive it is. So it's just kind of like anything. Geography matters at the end of the day. The other thing that I wanted to mention to everybody is the lock and dam system. This is one that just recently received some funding from our U.S. federal government after probably 30, 40 years of a lot of battles to get these things funded right. If a lock or dam goes down, it can be days or weeks of delay, especially if it happens at the wrong time of year, for everything on the waterway. And again, as drain folks, we love to have it, during the fall of the year. But guess what? A lot of our coal is shipped around this way. Almost every metal that is imported in the country comes up in northbound freight and goes to where it needs to be. In fact, where I sit at here between Louisville and Cincinnati, that's a big thing. We get a lot of our barges, they come up with metal already preloaded in them. They unload with one of our neighbors. The barge company cleans them out, turns them right back around, says, hey guys, here's your barge, go ahead and load it with grain and send it back down to the Gulf. And so that's, I think, a really cool and neat thing. But as you can tell, if you're up in Minneapolis or coming off the Illinois River, you've got to go through tons of these things. And our lock and dam system is probably anywhere from 75 to 100 years old in most locations. So they're in need of some sprucing up. So we're very grateful that funding has been given to us and allows us to do that. But there is no lock and dams. Basically, the Ohio has it, the Illinois River, and the upper Mississippi. Once you're kind of south of St. Louis, south of the Ohio River segment, there's no lock and dams. It's just kind of a race going down there to the Gulf, if you will, on some of those items. So with that, that's kind of the setup for what we look at from a transportation standpoint, how ag blends into it, kind of how barges work with it. Now I'm going to turn it over to Alex, who again sits on our rail desk and has tons of experience with this. So Alex, I'll turn it over to you and let you describe the rail system to everybody.
How's it going? Can you guys hear me?
Absolutely.
Okay, great, because I had some problems. Apparently, Zoom is not the same as Skype. That was my issue. So my name is Alex Abram, and I am a Western rail trader for CGB. I'm basically responsible for corn, a little bit of beans, and some minor amounts of wheat in the West. But Mike asked me to give you a little bit of an overview for the rail system and what we do. So the first map is the map of the US rail system. It's pretty cool because it looks like basically veins all over the United States and the body. It shows you pretty much how important this is to the entire country. That's why in December, when they were talking about the shutting down the system because of the workers' strike, and the president and Congress had to intervene, that was so important because everything would shut down. Everything that moves from the Western ports and the Eastern ports, everything would just sit. So, but it was solved and nothing happened, which was great. But the United States basically kind of has two systems, the Eastern system and the Western system. And the Mississippi River is kind of the dividing point. So in the East, you have DNS, you have the CSX, you have some minor railroads. In the West, you have the big BNSF owned by Warren Buffett. You have the Union Pacific You have the CP, KCS, and some smaller ones too. So let's go to the next slide. So here I used crayons to identify the major markets for me. And that's, I think Mike mentioned some of those before. So the red ones, and that's all grain that I think about. That's all I trade, grain. So the domestic markets where we send the grain to, the big ones would be basically in the east would be the southeastern United States, the Georgias, California, and the Carolinas. A lot of that stuff, if not everything, originates pretty much up where you guys are at: Ohio, Indiana, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Kentucky, on NS and CSX. In kind of the south central place of the United States, you have the western Texas, so like Hereford, Texas. A lot of cows, so we have to feed them. So a lot of trains from the Midwest on the BN and UP go there. And then in California and Arizona, big markets. Their agriculture is huge over there, so the milk cows and all of the other animals need to be fed pretty much. So a lot of stuff goes over there. The other color is the export. So let's go to the Northwest. So you have the PNW market. That is for the rail, that is the biggest export market. So beans go out of there for China and other destinations. Corn, wherever we have the season, goes out of there. Wheat goes out of there. A lot of trains go over there, particularly on the BNSF railroad. In the North, Canada, obviously, our major partner. There's some grain that goes there. Like last year, we had a drought in Canada, so we had a lot of corn go over there. This year, not that much. In the South, like Mike said, Mexico, it's a major partner over there. A lot of corn goes over there, beans as well. They just have, again, a lot of animals and not enough grain. And I really like that comparison to water. Like we have, our climate allows us to grow so well things and basically sell it to people, move it to people who don't have the same situation. So we've been kind of blessed with that. And then two other markets, we have the Gulf. So we have the Houston area, and we have where I am located, the New Orleans. I'm physically in Mandeville, Louisiana, which is about half an hour to 40 minutes north of New Orleans. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So as far as CGB and rail, it is true that CGB is barge centric. The purpose of CGB really has been to take the grain, put it on barges, send it down to Convent, Louisiana, put it on the vessel, and take it to Japan and other destinations. Rail for CGB has been something fairly new, really developed in the last 7-8 years. So the two facilities, major facilities that I deal with would be, the one on the left would be Falls City, Nebraska. And on the right, I didn't have a picture of it, so I just put it down. It's Dwight, Illinois. Dwight actually is able to ship on DNS and able to ship on the BN. And that gives it really good opportunity because this year the NS market sucks. So stuff goes, to Hereford where the basis is so much better. So these two origins, they ship to the Hereford market, to Western Texas to feed the animals. And we also have, CGB has a couple of facilities in Oklahoma, Enid, Oklahoma, and Shattuck, Oklahoma, where we bring the corn in and we put it on trucks and take it to a smaller feedlots. The next one. So a couple of things, what I just wanted to touch base on what my responsibilities kind of are, my department's responsibilities. We, for one, we trade grain. So we buy and sell the bases. We buy and sell, we trade the interior bases, what we call FAB bases, FAB different origins in the country. And we also trade the delivered bases. So the prices, in other terms, the prices somewhere in the interior and the prices somewhere else at the destinations. So basically we trade by FAB Dwight. I buy grain from Dwight and I buy grain from wholesale. And I also buy and sell P&W basis, so like an export market basis. Let's go to the next one. So the basis, the corn and bean basis, the grain is one part, but the big part of it is also transportation. So what we do on that side is we trade the cars, the equipment itself. So in the real world, every origin has a rate to go to another origin if the railroad allows. So from point A to point B, you have a rate, let's say from Nebraska to Hereford, Texas, it's $4,000 plus you have to pay for fuel. So let's say it's $4,200. Now that is pretty constant. For changes at the end of the year, the railroads are a little bit greedy and they add a little bit of money and it's more expensive every year. But what varies from day to day is the cost of cars. So cost of cars, these are shuttles. This is a 110 car shuttle equipment that you have to have in order to load it, to use it to load the grain in. So how it works is the railroads in the West auction, there's an auction program where you commit to a shuttle for a year period. So you get a train, 110 cars, and you basically run it every day from point A to point B. It's your responsibility to always have an origin and to have a destination, and you have to have it for an entire year. And if you, let's say, don't have an origin, or you, for example, you lost a trip because the railroad got your shuttle stuck for a week or two, you have to engage the secondary market. So if you don't have an origin, you have to sell the shuttle out because that's something you cannot park. In the barge industry, in the barge trade, you can always park the barge on the side of the river. In the rail market, you cannot. So you basically have to sell it out in the market. And sometimes you trade overs, meaning somebody pays you because he needs it. Or sometimes you have to pay somebody to use that shuttle because you have nothing to do with it. So it's a little bit complicated market, but it's very volatile. Sometimes it's a lot of fun. Sometimes it is not fun at all. It's just how it works in this market. But I guess that's what makes rail market interesting. So that's pretty much it from my end.
Thanks, Alex. I think a couple of things that are really interesting about this when we think of, we're hitting this up from the ag side of it, but I think if you subtract, say, barges out and maybe add airlines in, places like Amazon and FedEx and that, they have guys doing what Alex is doing, you know what I mean, at the same time. We're working different things like that. And then all the industries that require all of these different types of commodities and finished products, they're engaged in the same type of things. They might purchase that rail car and run it for a year, and that's their full obligation if they're something in the metals industry. And then all of a sudden, weather hits, they need to do something with it. They might try to offload that and find somebody like Alex or his team to go ahead and utilize that shuttle, et cetera, from it. So it's grain, but logistics is all around the world, and I think just as important with that. So but I think that's probably puts a wrap on what we had to share with the audience today, Jane. So I'm not sure if we want to open up for questions or have a career discussion or where we want to head from there.
Well, I'd like to do both. But I think that if we open it up for questions, then maybe that would be the best opportunity for you guys. Do we have any questions? You can either unmute and just speak because we only have about 20 people online. So I think we can manage that. Or if you want to type it in the chat, we can answer from there. So I'll give everybody a minute to kind of think about all you heard and what questions do you have? So do you, Alex, can you see that? It
No.
says, you said the NS market was bad. What makes it bad?
So when I say that the market is bad or low or sucks, it means that the bases are not high enough. So the pull to the destinations in the southeast of the United States is not as strong. So like Mike said, the harvest was really good in the east, right? So there's quite a bit of grain available, and the southeastern market doesn't have to fight for the grain. There is enough grain that automatically goes to it. So what happens is places like Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas will have to have bases strong enough to pull that grain away from that market. So the differentials, like Mike was showing, the differentials in the bases, right, have to be big enough to justify that Illinois grain that could ship on the NS to go west, to go on the BNSF. So just differentials in markets. So that's another thing. We're actually, United States is blessed with all of those systems because we can, it's a huge country. So one area has great harvest, the entire area doesn't have a great harvest. And each year, it kind of equalizes with all of the rail, barges, and truck. It's working.
So in the Southeast or the NS market, it isn't always bad. It's just bad because of that basis, and it depends on the supply.
Yeah, I do have to say that generally speaking, I do like the West better than the East, just because. But because it's a little different over there. I used to trade the East, and I do like the West just better. It's more transparent. And the railroads are a lot more transparent and willing to work with people, but that's another topic for another day. But there is times when like the harvest will be bad, the growing season will suffer, right, in the states in the east, and then the southeastern bases will have to be higher because they will have issues sourcing the grain. If they don't have to fight for grain, then they don't have to fight for the basis, right? If they cannot buy grain cheap enough, then they have to go and battle for it, like everybody else.
Right. Okay. So another question for you, Alex. You mentioned the shuttles are always moving. Roughly,
Yes.
how long do you have to load a shuttle and send it on its way to its next stop?
Can you repeat the last part? I couldn't hear it very well.
How long do you have to load the shuttle? Like how long is it sitting there to get loaded? And then
It's usually so on the BN network. This is where 90% of our business is. You have 10 hours, 10 to 15 hours. So the railroad, so the full amount of hours I think will be 15. But if you do it in 10, the BNSF will pay you $150 per car. If you do it, I think in 12, they pay you 100.
Okay.
So you're incentivized to keep that shuttle moving because that's how they that's one of their metrics. How fast the shuttle for the railroad, how fast is it moving, how many origins, how many times did it load. So it's they want that shuttle to move as fast as possible. Now they don't always perform. A lot of times they'll, especially in the winter time, and especially if it's busy and snowy, they will just not pick the shuttle up. So that's another story. But there is times when they will just, they will fail and just not do anything with that loaded shuttle, which creates all kinds of other problems. But
I can imagine. There's a question about a typical day, and probably both of you can speak to that. But I think before you answer that, if you could tell us what your degrees are in or how you got involved in what you're doing now. So I don't know, Mike, if you want to go first and then you can let Alex go.
Sure. Sorry, just waiting for my little microphone to pop up there. So my degree is actually in business management, finance, and marketing. I attended Purdue University, and I mentioned that because that is, from my understanding, one of the better ag schools in the country. And I know a lot of folks are over there in Ohio, and you've got some great ones over there as well. So definitely, we've got a lot of people that worked for us that went to those. But what I think is interesting maybe about my journey is I never stepped foot on the ag side of campus. I was going to be an investment banker and somebody in finance for a good number of years. Came out at the .com kind of bust, so those opportunities weren't available, and essentially fell into this and found I still get to be an economic nerd, if you will. And this is, farmers in general are just a better portion of the population. So it ended up working for me in the long run. But that's to say, we've got a ton of people with ag-centric degrees that do really well. I just happen to not be one of them. So I would say, for those of you out there that maybe didn't grow up on a farm or maybe have a lot of knowledge of agriculture, it's okay. Like most jobs, you'll figure it out. And, if you start to do well, you'll go through the normal, hopefully promotions and all that sort of fun stuff. So I'll mention that. You don't have to be totally ag-centric, but typical day. So again, for me, when I think about from a position standpoint, to me, it's know your position of what you're trading, whether that's logistics or in my case, futures. I do, some of the hedging work in that for the company. So know your position, and then know as the market responds, basically higher or lower, what that does to your position. Are you in a better or worse position because of some of those moves? And that helps you make better decisions as you go through it. So a lot of times making sure I just know where I'm at and what I'm doing. The other part of it is from a logistics standpoint, what's coming at me? Do I actually have things? Just because I've bought a train, like Alex said, doesn't mean it's showing up today right when I need it because my elevator is full and I need to do something with it. So when is that train, barge, truck thing actually showing up? So a lot of it's, where's my position? And then what do I have coming at me, coming and going, if you will, from that standpoint. Now, because I also deal with the buyers, a lot of that is phone calls. What's the producers doing? What is the producer mindset? What prices will they be willing to sell us grain? I may do some fancy kind of options and non-traditional ways for producers to hedge grain to kind of entice them to do something with us when maybe the price isn't right at the elevator. We might be able to market plans and just general market tools, be able to win them a few more cents to be able to do some of those things. So a lot of my time is analysis, and then I'm on the phone or on the computer making things happen. Is kind of a day in the life of, if you will. So I'll let Alex add to that, because he has a much more exciting life than I do.
I'm not sure it's as exciting. So I'm kind of different. I'm Polish originally. When I was 18, I came to the United States. I finished high school in Iowa. I went to a small college, UNI in Sioux Falls. I was a finance and Spanish major, and I didn't know anything about agriculture at all. I went to live in Spain for 6 months, and I kind of got acquainted with organic farming, and that's kind of where it started. But I actually, after that, I came back, I graduated from UNI. I went to the Ohio State University, and I graduated with a master's in ag economics, and I wanted to trade futures. That's what I wanted to do. My first job was actually at the Chicago Board of Trade as an economist, actually. I worked for the exchange itself, and then I kind of discovered that, there's a futures world, and there's also, the cash markets. And I don't know what happened, but I got really interested in the cash markets, and I left CBOT and went to work for the grain companies. And the rail, I traded truck, I traded barges, I did some feed ingredients. My first job was actually trading meat and bone meal and blood meal. It's another story, but a lot of other stories. But then I traded barges on the river. I was a sieve trader for 2 years. And then I went to the country, to Prairie du Chien, Wisconsin, where I started originating grain from the farmers. And I started trading rail, small units on a small railroad called WSOR. My life is a little different because people would usually start in the country and then go different places. I kind of started different places and went to the country. I spent a year in the country and then left from there, and then I traded Western United States for Bungie, PNW. I was I was originating beans for the export program, and then I came to work for CGB. My typical day, come to the office, see what problems I have to deal with. Pretty much. And, sometimes big problems, sometimes not so much. And then see where the markets are. Like Mike said, see where my positions are and how the markets, what do I need to do today, pretty much. On the trader side, I won't hide, there's always pressure to make things work and make money, because that's what makes the world move. And so that's what we focus a lot of our time on. How can we make things more efficient? How can we buy grain? What can we sell? What should we buy? What should we sell? What should we do? So that's pretty much it. That's the entire thing.
So a lot of decision making.
Yes, a lot of decision making. Yes.
Yeah.
And sometimes you have time to think about it. Sometimes you have to act pretty fast. So from the trading perspective, one thing that's very common is being wrong. and that happens to me very much so, to everybody. And that's something that if anybody's wanting to go that route, it's just something that has to be accepted and dealt with. It's just what it is.
Okay, well, thanks so much. I do want to give Maddie Lehman a minute to talk also. And then we do have just one quick question. If there is an education level that you're looking for in your company before we move to Maddie. I think Maddie's still on. I don't know. Maybe I should probably check before I call her out. But do you have a particular education level that you're looking for? Do you hire right out of high school? Do you hire associates, bachelors, higher level degrees? What are you looking for?
Sure, I'll kind of tackle that one. So most of the time for our, I would say, white collar type jobs, office jobs, doing what Alex and I do, that's just a basic college education, if you will. We mostly look for ag majors. Doesn't matter which ones. Can be ag sales to ag economics and all the stuff in between. We also dabble in business schools quite a bit. So a lot of times we'll head over to Ohio State, for example, and look not only at their business folks, but also their ag folks, as you would imagine. That said, we feel like, one, the grain industry is a little different than most in that even though it's really old, there's not a lot of great stuff written, or you can't Google a whole lot of stuff on it. So we have to do a lot of internal training. So from that standpoint, we're prepared to take people where they're at. The 100 most important thing to us is probably our culture. We're probably screening more for personality, resilience, grit. Like Alex said, a lot of our jobs, you're just going to be wrong a lot. And you got to be able to deal with that. And that's not everybody's personality or style. And hopefully, as you can tell from both me and Alex, just conversational style, hopefully we're a little less stuffy than maybe some other spots in that. So again, it's one of those areas where, there's a lot going on, and we want to have folks that have a solid background, again, in a college education, yet at the same time have a lot of flexibility and grit within themselves. And I think those are generally the candidates that we're looking the most for.
Yeah, we hear that a lot. Soft skills are big. So any way you can get kids to kind of hang in there, develop persistence. Yeah, that seems to be across the board. Can we do just one little waterfall thing in the chat real quick? What careers do you think are associated with CGB and this transportation thing? So if you have an idea of what career might be something that's related, there are a ton of them. So all answers are good. So 3, 2, 1, start typing. I like that. I saw welding, economics, finance.
So everybody has something that we do right now. So
Yeah,
there's no outliers.
Yeah. Well, and yeah, mechanics, yeah, keeping the trains going, keeping the barges running and the
Environmental engineer, that's a big deal too, especially in
Mhm.
today's business climate, making sure we're doing things the right way. So for sure.
Yes, health and safety too. Because there's a lot of moving parts to those grain elevators. Oh, I love that too. Translators. Yep. When
Perfect.
you're dealing with international customers, gotta be able to speak the language.
Translators and lawyers.
Oh, yeah. And HR. Oh, yeah, there's another one, HVAC. Customs and tariffs, and yeah, dealing with all of that paperwork, I'm sure is a huge part of the whole thing too. When you're moving grain across the country or across the world. All right. Well, thank you to all who participated with us today. We really appreciate your attention and your interest in this topic. And thank you especially to Mike and Alex and your time that you spent developing this. Is it all right if we send out the slide deck to the teachers?
Absolutely. They're certainly welcome to it.
Okay, and then there are that one video does have a little section on careers that talks a little bit about CGB and the careers that are related there. But I do think it's really helpful to have our students do a little brainstorming on how does everything get from one place to another. You know, and everybody's so used to Amazon that doesn't even seem like it's a problem anymore. But there's a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes. So hopefully you got a little peek behind the curtain of how grain gets moved from place to place. We appreciate your attention. We'll be sending you a couple of links to activities, and we actually have a new game that we're going to ask some people to pilot in their classrooms. So we'll be sending that out probably by the end of the week or early next, just because I got to get all my ducks in a row and make sure you have everything you need. But again, we thank Mike, we thank Alex, we thank CGB, Grow Next Gen. We hope you have a really good evening.
Thank you all.